to members of the public who are watching the webcast of our special council meeting for Monday, December 14th. And it's a special council meeting, not because of the time of year, but because we had a committee of the whole meeting scheduled for this evening, and we've rescheduled it to a council meeting. I'd like to call our meeting to order at 6 p.m. and I'm Mayor Cliff McNeil-Smith. Joining me in the council chamber is Councillor Scott Garnett, and our 5 councillor colleagues are joining us via Zoom. You can see them on your screen on the webcast. And good evening to Councillors Sarah Duncan, Terry O'Keefe, Chad Rintoul, Peter Wainwright, and Barbara Fallett. Joining us in the council chamber and also on Zoom are several members of staff who you will be able to hear but won't see in the council chamber. Good evening to our CEO, Mr. Humble, Randy Humble, Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Andrew Hissick, our Fire Chief, Brett Mickelson, and I believe we have Senior Manager of Current Planning, Corey Newcomb, and our Corporate Officer, Sandy Nelson. I'd like to begin with a respectful acknowledgement that we're holding this evening's meeting in the territory of the Wisanish Nations, and I'll turn to Council for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. We'll now go into public participation, and we do have one written submission, which I'll turn to Mr. Humble in a moment to read out. And then we have 3 speakers this evening who will each have 3 minutes, to be fair, to speak before council, and then we will go on to a presentation. So I'll first ask Mr. Humble to read out the written submission.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is from Mr. Andrew Crump, who's the owner of 2459 Beacon Avenue, and it's in reference to the cannabis retail license application, which is item 13A on this evening's council agenda. So it's reads, reference Seed and Stone. As a landlord of Atticus Holdings has been conducting due diligence. As a property owner, we would like to ensure that we will be leasing to a reputable company that can enhance the community of Sydney. Seed and Stone are an established company who already have experience in the cannabis retail sector. They provide an open, friendly, and educational approach to the sale of cannabis in a retail environment. I hope you can share in our support of their application. As part of our due diligence, we have engaged a consulting firm with professional experience in law enforcement and legal matters concerning the cannabis market. A full report will be available for the next council meeting. That concludes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll now turn to our first speaker, John Trelevin. Mr. Trelevin, if we'll unmute, and you do have 3 minutes before council. Good evening. Is he now in? We'll just be a moment here while we get John Trelevin connected again. Good evening, John Trelevin. You do have 3 minutes before council. If you just want to unmute.
No problem. We're being Zoomed. Anyway, I wanted to assure you that we will take corrective action on use of the word permanent. What we're recognizing is that this council stepped up at a time of unprecedented pressure on the community and the business community, like no other did in this region. And I don't know, but I guess not many in Canada. to actually approve a tax decrease on commercial and industrial land was courageous. And if I may quote the mayor during that meeting, when Cliff McNeil Smith said, look, there's not much a municipality can do in these circumstances because obviously the federal government was announcing major mitigation measures and the province, but this we can do, and this you did. And for that, this community and the broader community should be really grateful. And I would think other councils in the region should take a very close look at their actions when their business community was facing the same issue. So thank you very much, and congratulations. Now, we've made 3 awards this year. One was to the South Island Prosperity Partnership for their amazing ability to build a partnership beyond the initial stages in this pandemic, as you're well aware, to shape sector-specific suggested recovery strategies and involving dozens of private sector representatives and many others. It seems to me that the wisdom behind the SIP architecture, Sydney's participation in SIP, was demonstrated most amply by their response in this very difficult time. And thirdly, to the city of Victoria, because we've all had situations where major capital projects were being built, and sometimes councils take full advantage and some don't. We're recognizing what they've been able to do with the infrastructure being built for the sewer project to make a remarkable investment in a part of the region which we all enjoy so much. So in closing, let me thank you once again and apologize for the mistake we made in the press release. And so now Andrew and Randy can either stop the out of van or stop the beta blockers. And I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you, Mr. Trelevin. We may have missed the very beginning of your presentation in terms of the organization that you're representing.
Oh, the grumpy taxpayers of Greater Victoria, we have awarded our coveted Candy Cane Award to the town of Sydney on a couple of other occasions. And as I say, this time it was because of the courage, the timeliness, and the importance of that decision to actually cut taxes to the business community in view of the pandemic. No one else did that in the region. Indeed, other councils are talking about tax increases and adding more staff, which they should follow your example. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trelevin, for coming before council tonight and for your positive remarks. I'll turn to our next speaker, who is Denny Gelina. If Mr. Gelina, you could give us your address, and you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Hi there.
Good evening, Denny Gelina. Please give us your address, and you have the floor before council for 3 minutes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Denny Gelina, 2545 Oakville Avenue, Sydney. I wanted to speak to you tonight. First of all, thank you for letting me speak to you tonight. To commend the town, and I guess I would add the BIA, for the wonderful display of lights and greenery along Beacon and the waterfront and elsewhere in Sydney to mark the holiday season. The town of Sydney staff has always done a marvelous job in decorating our streets, but this year they've gone the extra mile with new lighting and displays, including the strings of lights along the fishing pier. That's a really phenomenal view. If you have the chance to walk by during the evening when they're on, it's really, really great. It's a real showstopper. Over the past 9 months, our lives have changed in so many ways, and still we have many months to go before we reach new normal, whatever that may be. So I'd encourage residents to take time over the holidays to walk around Sydney, socially distancing, take in the lights, the sights, and other decorations, and it may help lift our spirits. So that's all I wanted to say tonight. Thank you again. Fabulous. The town looks great. Appreciate everything you're doing. I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ginlina. We really appreciate your comments and coming before council to speak to the public. Thank you. I'll turn to our third speaker, Mr. Vikram Sachdeva. I hope I've pronounced your last name correct, sir. And we'll actually wait for you to be admitted.
Hello.
Good evening, Mr. Sachdeva. Can you hear us?
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Yes, you do have the floor for 3 minutes, sir. Did you have your audio or your video turned off?
No, it should be coming on. Can you guys see me now?
Okay, we now see your video and your audio. Good evening, and you have 3 minutes before council.
Good evening. Thank you for worship and council to allow me to speak in front of you today. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to just start by giving a broad view of what our business is all about. Our first store located in Chilliwack, BC has shown that legal cannabis can and will benefit communities, and any negative impact can be responsibly mitigated to ensure safe and positive experiences around purchasing of cannabis. I'm pleased to announce that the province of BC has deemed me fit and proper to operate additional licensed cannabis stores, namely in Chilliwack, now in Langley, and hopefully in Victoria. This is not a simple or routine matter, as numerous applicants fail to secure an approval for reasons including lack of capital, criminal records, or associations with organized crime. This rigorous approval process can take up to 6 to 8 months for new applicants, or even longer, and help municipalities differentiate between legitimate and illegitimate applicants. As such, this significantly strengthens our application compared to others. In Victoria, there have been a number of applications that were given municipal approval but were not able to get their fit and proper. We are also very socially responsible, and we have, the reason I bring up Victoria is we have another application there with Songhees First Nations. We have partnered with them, and we're opening a store on 901 Gordon Street, for which our fit and proper is well under the way. Keeping all that in mind, we would therefore kindly request the council to consider this referral further upon as per previous applications they have done. We also are committed to being a community member and a good neighbor. We go above and beyond. We try to put up filters wherever there is any odor, even though no product is ever used. We have in the store. We have age gated. We are committed to returning. Giving back to the community by offering $10,000 of our yearly sales towards parks and recreation, or any way the council might deem it fit proper to use towards education of cannabis use and things like that. We are age gated, and we will make sure that we keep the industry humble by keeping our prices competitive, and not forgetting the tax dollars that we bring in. In Chilliwack, in the first 6 months of operations, we contributed over $100,000 in taxes. On that note, I would appreciate if the council can give us an opportunity to represent ourselves in front of public and get more input. We did a deal with our landlord, and he did a rigorous check on us to make sure that we were the right partner. I have experience for the past I had worked for the liquor distribution branch for 8 years, and I have ran brick and mortar restaurants for about 21 years. I'm 40 now, and I intend to do the same responsibly, distributing cannabis in whichever community our brand goes in. Thank you for your time. I'll be here for any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Mr. Sachdeva. We do have on the agenda item later this evening to consider the referral from the LCRB, and that will be coming up in a short while. So thank you for coming before council this evening.
No worries. Thank you.
That will bring public participation to a close. And I'll next turn to our presentation this evening. It's with regards to development variance permit application number DV 100298, which is at 10194 3rd Street. And it is to renovate and construct an addition to an existing single-family dwelling. And we have a presentation from Mr. Art Finlayson of Finlayson Bonet Architecture. And we'll have Mr. Bonet join us in just a moment on Zoom.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Finlayson. I've just introduced the development variance permit application and the address, and that you're making a presentation this evening. You do have the floor for 10 minutes. We would then turn to our colleagues for any questions and answers that you might have, and then later in the agenda we will, of course, turn to it as an agenda item.
Thank you very much. I'm at home with my computer here, and David and Anne Marie are at their home, and I think they've been able to get in. I'm not sure, but I think everybody has seen the application. And talking with David today, he just wants to kind of say that we know that we're over the amount by 0.8% for the lot coverage, but this is really comes out due to the fact that the garage, we're trying to put a 24 by 24 foot garage in the complex. There was a single car garage and a kind of a little office and storage, plus there was a storage shed. And what's happening, even though we are putting, I think, a very nice arts and crafts home on the corner, the storage we're losing. The house itself doesn't lend itself, even though we've tried to make it a little bigger. Really basically in the bedroom and the kitchen area, but the storage is a factor that we were hoping to offset the loss of the storage from the yard and put it in the back of the garage where we need we're 24 feet deep to gain that space. So basically, that's all that we're really asking. I think there was one other variance, which was the side yard on Amelia, but that was there already, and so the planners have said that they will forego that and allow us to leave that house encroaching on that side yard. But basically, we're asking that we need that bit of storage in the back of the garage. It's not bothering anybody. The neighbors have been talked to, and they're all in favor. And I think that we would just like to see us be able to get that 0.8% addition. Are there any questions?
Well, thank you, Mr. Finlayson. I'll turn to colleagues if they have any questions for Mr. Finlayson. I'll first turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Finlayson. Just a couple of quick questions. If you could tell me what the current square footage of the home is and what the square footage would be after the modifications?
Just go to my notes here. The area of the house is 1,532 square feet, and that would on the one floor would make it 30.6%. On the lower floor, that would be the main floor. On the lower floor, we are at 30.5%. So the total, when you add those together, it comes to that extra amount.
Do you want to restate your question, Councillor?
That's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Finlayson? Seeing none, thank you again, Mr. Finlayson, for your presentation this evening. And The item will come up, as I say, in just a short while on our agenda for deliberation by council.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas.
Thank you, and to you as well. So that will end our presentations. I'll now turn to item 5, and we have 5 bylaws to consider in various stages this evening. The first is bylaw number 2202, Tree Preservation Amendment number 2. This has come before council for discussion, and we have done first, second, and third reading with discussion, and we have a recommendation.
I'll move that the bylaw be adopted.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to the second, bylaw number 2203, Sidewalk Cafe Regulations, and this is amendment number 2. And we have a staff report dated December 8th. And we have discussed this at previous council, but tonight we could move forward with 3 readings by separate motions.
I'll move first reading.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Discussion? I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in reviewing this, I had some comments on it, which passed along to staff. And what I was hoping is that we could, I thought the bylaw could benefit from some clarification in the terminology. Just because we had, the motion previously had, in November, had been about allowing temporary and permanent shelter structures. Then we've changed it to semi-permanent. There's also mention of temporary fixtures. And I just thought it might be confusing for businesses who might not be too sure of what's the difference between semi-permanent and temporary. And so in order to clarify that, I went back to staff, and just to clarify with staff, they had proposed some definitions for fixtures, definition for semi-permanent, for structures, and temporary, that they thought that we might be able to incorporate that. And I'm just wondering if now would be the time to make an amendment to consider incorporating those into the bylaw.
This is the time to make amendments, Councillor, if you wish to proceed.
Okay, so what I would move that, first of all, we rename the bylaw slightly, and so that it would read that this is a bylaw to authorize the placement of temporary and semi-permanent fixtures and structures on sidewalks and on roadways within the town of Sydney. In addition,
That need to be seconded?
probably, I don't know if it should, I was going to go on with the definitions as well.
Well, I think we should do them at one at a time. I think we can take the name
Okay.
change first.
Okay,
And I'll just ask
Okay,
the
sure.
staff if they have that and could read it back, please.
Yes, and just to clarify, that is not considered the title of the bylaw, but rather the subtitle of the bylaw. So
Right,
the amendment
okay.
would be to make the subtitle amendment to read a bylaw to authorize the placement of temporary and semi-permanent fixtures and structures on sidewalks and on roadsides within the town of Sydney.
yes.
Okay, we have that seconded by Councillor Fallett. Discussion. Did you wish to motivate further, Councillor O'Keefe?
No, that's fine. We can vote on it unless anybody has, some clarifications or particular issues. All that we're really doing is we're, as per staff's suggestion in our email back and forth today, we're just inserting and semi-permanent into the subtitle is really the only change. Semi-permanent fixtures and structures is what we're adding in, just for further clarity.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fallett, did you wish to, as a seconder, wish to motivate?
No, I think that would be wise just to put the definition out there because the terms can be interchangeable, and this would just define it better. So I would concur with Councillor O'Keefe.
Okay, so we're referring to the title changes now, not the not
Yes,
definition.
yes.
But Councillor Rintoul, I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm comfortable with the suggestion, and I note that Councillor O'Keefe alluded to communication with staff, which council is privy to, where staff endorsed this. That was my take on the communication from staff. But if I could get someone from staff just to confirm that they're comfortable, there's no implications that they see with the changes that are suggested.
Mr. Humble?
Yeah, I'll, if I can, Mr. Mayor, I'll defer to Ms. Clary, who's on the Zoom call.
Thank you for that question through Mayor to Councillor Rintoul. You're correct. We don't have any objections with changing it. It's just one thing that might need to be changed back next year if we do rescind this, but that's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the title change or title amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Please proceed, Councillor O'Keefe.
Yes, and I would also move that we add the following definitions. Number 1, fixtures. Objects which may consist of tables, chairs, screens, umbrellas, and or portable planters. 2, semi-permanent. A fixture or structure that will not be removed from the sidewalk or roadside when the food vending establishment is not open for business, but can easily be removed as required by this bylaw. Number 3, structures. Portions of a building which may consist of floors, walls, stairs, doors, and or a roof. And lastly, temporary. A fixture or structure that will be removed from the sidewalk or roadside when the food vending establishment is not open for business. And again, those were came from staff, and staff seemed to think that those would be suitable definitions.
Second.
So we have that moved and seconded. I'll just turn to staff quickly again on those particulars if they have any additional comment.
Sure, through the mayor. Yeah, I think this actually will kind of complete the bylaw and make it more clear for businesses who are wanting to do these. We were a little hesitant to call them permanent structures just because, you know, they are on the municipal right of way, and if they are for weather protection, we would expect them to be moved during the summer, and there's various reasons why they may need to be removed for whether it's for construction or there's some event where they need to be removed for whatever reason. So that's why the semi-permanent was in there. But overall, we are happy with these definitions if council is as well.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I guess through to staff, here, as soon as Councillor O'Keefe read out what the definition of structure, I started thinking about when we have definitions of structure that's in other bylaws, like the size of sheds in yards and, you know, composters and things, that there's like height and dimensionality. And so should there be making that structure cross-reference any of those or align with any of those, or is just that it has walls and a roof and a floor of any kind of material and of any height going to be adequate for this? I'm thinking if they build like a half-height wall that's only like a meter or something, that counts or doesn't count. But where does the threshold of when it becomes a structure compare?
Ms. Clary.
So through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, so we would be following the BC Building Code, and it really depends when a building permit would be required. So that's outlined. So this definition of structures doesn't necessarily relate to any of our other bylaws, but we do have to follow those other bylaws. So So in our building bylaw, where it says you need a building permit, we would require that for what's considered a structure in the building code, or in the building bylaw.
So a structure that the BC building code will determine whether or not it needs the other building permits. And this one is just as long as they're building a structure with those features that's attached to it. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the question and the reply. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed, that carries. Thank you. And we'll turn to third reading.
I'll move third reading.
Second?
All those in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. So that bylaw will now come to a future meeting for consideration of final adoption. Moving on to the third is bylaw number 2204, building regulations, amendment number 10, to waive fees for building permits, and this is connected to the work that council and staff have done with regards to the sidewalk cafe regulations. And again, we have we can proceed this evening. Yes.
In the staff report.
Sorry, I'm reading the recommendation off the agenda. Sorry, if you'd like to proceed, Councillor, thank you for that.
Yep. I'll move that staff bring back bylaw number 2203, an amendment to the sidewalk cafe regulations and licensing bylaw, which allows permanent structures on the municipal boulevard in November 2021 for consideration of rescinding the bylaw.
Second.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In consultation with staff earlier today, since the desire from staff was to not focus on permanent structures, we were focusing on semi-permanent structures. And so the suggestion was made that in that second recommendation, that we would change it and replace the word permanent with temporary and semi-permanent. So I would look to amend the recommendation in that manner if the mover and seconder would concur with that.
So if you could be specific, if you could again, please, Councillor O'Keefe, in the wording, amending the existing motion and the wording for that.
Sure. So in the second line of the recommendation, where it says which allows permanent structures, so the proposed amendment is to delete permanent and replace it with temporary and semi-permanent.
Okay, do we have a seconder?
Second.
Okay, we have a seconder. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. That motion carries. Thank you. Thank you again, Councillor Garnett. I'll now turn to the third bylaw, number 2204. Again, the building regulations amendment number 10 to waive fees for building permits, and we can proceed tonight with first, second, and third readings.
I'll move first reading.
Second.
All those in favor? The motion carries unanimous.
Move second reading.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you, and that will come to a future council meeting for consideration of adoption. Oh, sorry, my mistake. This is a bylaw that is within the provincial ministerial order that was brought forward earlier this year, allowing councils to give final adoption to certain bylaws that have a financial impact and may have a sense of urgency, and so we do have the option of adoption this evening.
I'll move adoption.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. We'll turn to the fourth. That is bylaw number 2205, land use procedures, amendment number 6 to waive fees for development permits, and we can do the first, second, third reading and adoption this evening.
Move first reading.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
So we're talking about waiving the business license fees,
No,
correct?
No, we're on the one,
land use.
we're on
I just-
5A4, which is bylaw number 2205 for land use procedures, Councillor.
Okay, sorry, I got my 5As all mixed up. Yeah, okay, that's fine.
There's several of them.
Yeah, no discussion from me on that one.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you.
Move third reading.
Second,
All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Move adoption.
second,
All in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you for that. We'll now turn to the last of the bylaws, and this is new business to council and for members of the public. Bylaw number 2206, business license amendment number 1. We have a staff report dated December 8th, and I would turn to staff for an introduction, please.
I'll defer to Ms. Verhagen.
Good evening, Ms. Verhagen.
Hello. Through the mayor to all of council, this report covers a proposal that was recently made to council to waive business license fees for the 2021 calendar year as a pandemic response initiative to support the business community. The report outlines how this might be done in terms of staff sending out a letter to businesses to let them know of this decision if it is made, and asking them, instead of payment to renew their license for 2021, to submit updated contact information, which would help us contact them in future if another EOC business survey is done, and also just for general contact, better improved contact with the business. The report also outlines the financial implications of waiving fees, and just mentions that the fee isn't exorbitant. It ranges from $25 to $200 depending on the size of the business. $50 to $200, it says in the report. For a seasonal business that's only for 3 months, the fee is $25. So not much of an impact to an individual business, but it would make a statement to the business community by showing support during the pandemic. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Before we turn to the bylaw, I'll turn to questions. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and with apologies, I've read the report. I'm familiar with it, and it's dawned on me that as someone who pays this business license fee, perhaps I should have excused myself from this conversation. So if I may, through to the CAO, if you would like me to stand down from the conversation at this point, I will.
I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Through the mayor, no, I don't believe there's any perceived conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
you for that clarification. If I can then through to staff, the report indicates that this was a suggestion that came to staff. I don't recollect seeing where it came from, and I'm just curious. I think it's a fantastic idea. I'm pleased that staff have moved forward making this recommendation. But I'm just wondering if it came from the business community or from the task force or where.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd like to thank Councillor Wainwright for bringing it forward to myself and to staff for discussion and for the presentation this evening.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. A couple comments and then some questions to staff. I also think this is an excellent idea. I mean, I know it's a relatively small amount in most cases, but I think as been mentioned before in regards to the property taxes, and as staff mentioned, it sends a message to our business community that we understand the difficulties that they're experiencing, and we recognize the important role they play in our community. So if this is one small thing that we can support them with, I think that's a good thing. It's a good retention initiative, and it says something good about Sydney, that we're business friendly, and we appreciate and acknowledge the important role that businesses have. So I think this is great. I did have a question for staff about, I like the idea about making it conditional on receiving updated contact information. So when we come to making the motion, I think I would insert something on that. I also had questions for staff about the number of delinquent licenses. And I understand that there's relatively few of those. And they're delinquent for their 2020 fees. Is that correct?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, yes, that's correct. We have just over 900 businesses licensed in Sydney, and I believe there's less than 15 that have not yet paid their 2020 business license fee.
Okay, and so I'm also presuming that their 2020 licenses would have been due prior to the COVID outbreak?
Again, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, yes, they were due at the beginning of this year.
Okay, so they're not necessarily in arrears because of COVID. There's some other things going on there.
They may have been. It's not possible to guess each business's situation, but some may have been affected by it.
Okay, and there was some suggestion in the report that we would apply the waiver of 2021 fees to even those who are behind. Is that correct? But that we could have the flexibility for those who are in arrears to say they're not eligible for the 2021 waiver until they're up to date with their 2020. Would that be correct?
I believe the report indicated that the 2021 fee should be waived for all businesses. Those that are still delinquent in payment for 2020 should pay that fee, and that not be waived, the 2020 fee not be waived, but the 2021 fee be waived, with the condition that they submit the updated contact information, as for all the other businesses.
Right, but we could, we could though make it a condition, perhaps to encourage them to get up to date, that if they wanted to get a break on their 2021, anybody who wanted a waiver of their 21 business license fees needed to be in good standing for 2020. So that is something that we could make a condition if council so chose.
Yes.
Okay.
I do have a question through staff. Is if a business that was in arrears for 2020 came forward to get a 2021 business license, would we in fact issue a 2021 business license with the 2020 fees not being paid?
To the mayor, staff would require payment for the 2020 license before the 2021 license is renewed.
Okay, so I think we're fine procedurally. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for presenting the positive aspects of the rationale for doing this. Any further discussion? I see none. I'll call a question.
Okay, well, I would.
Sorry, it's not enough. Go ahead, Councillor.
May I go ahead? I was going to make a motion that was slightly different to the one that's recommended.
Please proceed.
Okay, I would move that business license fees for existing and new businesses for the 2021 calendar be waived, provided that their business license fees have been paid for 2020 and they have updated their contact information with the town.
Is that seconded, Councillor Wainwright?
No, I was going to point out a technical problem with the motion.
Okay.
New businesses are not going to have paid their 2020 fees because they're new businesses.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor Wainwright. And I think also, staff have just spoken to the fact that if a business is applying for a 2021 license and have fees in arrears for 2020, that those would be paid first. So I realize there's two things you're wishing to amend this bylaw. One is subject to information updates, but the other is. So I'll let you reconsider, Councillor.
Okay, well, what I'll do, I'll pull out the stuff about the 2020. Maybe we can deal with that separate. So I'll just say that business license fees for existing and new businesses for the 2021 calendar year be waived, provided they have updated their contact information with the town.
Second.
Second, any further discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Sorry, so just getting back to the issue of the ones that are delinquent for their 2020 business license fees, I'm still struggling with that we would go ahead and give them a waiver on their 2021 business license fees when they haven't paid their 2020.
Okay, Councillor, I think we had clarification from staff that if a business, an existing business, is in arrears for 2020 on their business license fees and comes forward to comes forward for their 2021 business license, that staff would expect payment of 2020 before issuing 2021.
Okay, that's fine then. I didn't, I wasn't hoisting that in. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, no, happy to provide that. And so we do have the amended motion on the first, moved and seconded. No further discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. Did you wish to continue at all, Councillor O'Keefe?
No, I think that was, I think that's all.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
First reading. First reading.
We now have 3 readings.
I'll move first reading.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Discussion. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to echo what's been spoken earlier, and thank staff for bringing this forward, and also now knowing that Councillor Wainwright brought it forward, commend him for the thought. Every little bit helps, and I think we've shown to be a council that supports our business community and wants to do everything we can, so I'm firmly behind supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Move adoption.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to adoption of minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes, those from our regular council meeting of
Development variance permit.
Sorry?
Development variance permit.
We're going to turn to item 5B, which is the development permits and development variance permits. And further to the presentation we have this evening, it's development variance permit application number DV 100298 for 10194 3rd Street. Again, to renovate and construct an addition to an existing single-family dwelling, and a report from staff dated December 3rd.
Would you like to do these separately? I'll move the first recommendation that the applicant submit a redesigned proposal that meets the maximum lot coverage requirements listed within sections 5.2.1 and 5.2.4.b of the zoning bylaw.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. Through to staff, it seems like a relatively small volume or area that we're referring to, and as such, could you speak perhaps to discussions, if any, that occurred with either the architect or the applicant around their willingness or ability to make some revisions? I know during the presentation they spoke to this relating to some storage space in the garage, if I understood correctly. What was the reception like to staff's concerns with respect to a variance which appears to be quite limited in terms of its area?
I'll defer the
Through
question.
the mayor to Councillor Rintoul. Yes, staff have spoken with the applicant previously about the requested variance to lot coverage, and indicated that because it is so close to what the zoning bylaw permits, could they scale it down to fit within the zoning bylaw requirement? They indicated that they would like to have the additional space, so chose to apply for the variance.
I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor Duncan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I tend to agree with staff on this. I mean, it is a minor variance, but my reading on this is it's to make way for more storage space in a bigger garage. And, you know, as we've talked about in previous variances, you know, storage space and the room for your car or whatever are things you should be looking at when you purchase a property. If there was some other sort of mitigating circumstances, I might be more inclined, you know, if we were looking at that this was being done to create, you know, a secondary suite or a duplex or additional housing, I might be more inclined to support it. But as it is now, I tend to go along with what staff are recommending here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The one thing that is making me be open-minded to considering this variance is the letter actually from the proponent. They're mentioning that trying to reuse the existing structure as opposed to tearing it down and building something new is quite challenging because they've got to work with the dimensions that are currently there, and that's what's giving them the difficulty. So I think what they're essentially telling us in that letter is that they wouldn't have, if they simply demolished the whole thing and built a new structure, they could have exactly what they want and live within the zoning bylaw. But they don't want to actually demolish the whole thing. They think that's not environmentally a good practice. So given that they want to try to reuse as much of the structure as they can, and they need the storage because they're getting rid of the accessory outbuildings, that's their justification for the variance. And the letter says that they've talked to their neighborhood about it, and it is a relatively small exception to the lot coverage. So I'm open-minded to hearing from the neighborhood what they think, but I'm also open-minded of hearing from our APC what they think. So my thought was actually, rather than giving them any direction tonight, would be to refer it to APC and hear what APC thinks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I am in agreement with Councillor O'Keefe on this, that if this was to actually gain more housing units, and so they needed that extra space, I'd be more in favor. It's just looking at the numbers here, this is a 3,100 square foot house. This is, I believe what Councillor Garnett was asking about earlier. This is a big house. And I know that their letter has said it's because it's 2 feet on their garage, but I'm flicking back and forth looking at the existing house and what they're adding onto it. And the garage is the addition, so that they're asking for that 2 square feet for their storage cabinets, where they can easily make the garage a smaller addition, and it's not going to affect them having to knock down an additional wall on their building envelope here. This is a matter, it looks like, of people wanting to put in garage storage and have a 2-car garage when, you know, the lot size that they have bought is simply not large enough for the house and the style of house that they would like to have. And just knowing that people are trying to build very large houses on small lot sizes, you know, in already these dense neighborhoods that are going to end up being kind of chock-a-block against each other, I just can't justify the additional, 70 square feet that surely could be found somewhere else in this building design. So for that reason, I'm in favor of the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All of the previous speakers have made excellent points. I think I like the idea of taking and making use of the APC in decisions like this. Councillor O'Keefe and Duncan make a good point. Given our housing crunch, that's kind of what I was looking to see in the diagram. And I did do a site visit, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you sit on the corner and you look at the side of the house from Amelia, and you hold up the schematics to what's there now, it actually looks pretty imposing, and the massing is quite big, as I think staff refers to in the report. So I'm kind of a little torn on it. I'm more in line with going with the staff recommendation, but I also can appreciate Councillor Wainwright's suggestion of sending it to the APC. Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett before speaking. Councillor Fallett?
Thank you. I would concur with Councillors O'Keefe, Duncan, and Garnett. When I look at the drawings, and the conversation is about replacing the storage unit that is existing on the property and adding more storage into the house, I would also note that we have 112 square foot laundry room. So I don't think storage is really the issue. There is adequate room within the footprint of the house. I realize that some people like larger space, and I'm not suggesting that they aren't entitled to it, but right here they are starting to exceed the parameters of what the property allows. And so I'm happy to refer this to APC, but I would note that there appears to be ample square footage in this house. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Before making my comments, I think all of the comments have been good for Council and are good to be made, and that we have a decision as to whether to approve or not approve, move forward with this, or to refer to APC. My comment is, I want to make I'm in support of it going to APC, but a question through to staff, was there a reason for not making a recommendation of this going to APC because of the timelines that the proponent wishes to proceed?
To address the mayor's question, no, the reason for not referring to APC was that the property is not within a development permit area for form and character or environmental sensitivity. So the design of the house is not controlled through design guidelines. We typically don't refer variances like this to APC, however, it's always at council's decision. Just to make a comment on the lot coverage and the size of the addition, staff had indicated before, as I mentioned, that the size of the addition is what's putting them over the maximum lot coverage. And staff had indicated to the applicant that if they just reduce the depth of the addition by a marginal amount all along, they would be able to achieve the lot coverage. There's a number of ways to reduce it to meet the bylaw requirement. But they indicated that it is their preference to apply for the variance. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. And my second is for clarification. I think council is aware, but perhaps for the public, and that is there is a second variance in the chart, the zoning comparison. It says a variance is required for the side exterior on the north side. That requires a minimum setback of 3.0 meters, but is in fact at 1.98. And so that is a setback or a variance of just over a meter on that north side. But as it states in the staff report, because it's legal non-conforming, council in fact doesn't grant a variance. That variance is given by its legal non-conforming status.
No, just to clarify there, the existing house as it sits is considered legal non-conforming, legal, not illegal. But legal non-conforming in that it was there before the current zoning bylaw setback requirement was in effect. Adding on to that side of the house, continuing that plane as it goes along the side street, the addition needs a variance, and that can be done through the development variance process. The addition would not be legal non-conforming unless it would have to go through the variance to be allowed to be built there.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, and now my comment, and that is, while it is a small percentage change on the lot coverage, The existing building does have I think a meter, just over a meter is a significant variance on the setback. And that, and the fact that that has been there and has been in the neighborhood, it seems, I mean, it's legal non-conforming, but it's acceptable as well. And staff are making the recommendation in terms of the addition portion that we go ahead and grant the variance to that same variance. So I think council, the staff recommendation in council is that this building, and going to the size of a structure that it is, already is much larger than if a new building was going on this property. So I'm in favor of the staff recommendation, but my preference would be for this to go to APC, and for APC to be apprised of council's comments this evening. So we do have a motion on the floor that the applicant submit a redesign proposal that meets the maximum lot coverage requirements listed within section 5.21 and 5.24B of the zoning bylaw. Moved and seconded. And so is there any further discussion before calling the question? Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand my colleagues' comments, and I guess at this point, looking at this from the lens of the applicant, it feels to me like if I were in their shoes, I may have taken a slightly different perspective on this. Nevertheless, here we are for this amount of space. I sympathize with the applicant from the sense that the cost is going to be escalating here as they look to make revisions to their technical drawings, etc. I'm more comfortable seeing this referred to APC, as Councillor Wainwright suggested, and at this point I won't support the staff recommendations here. Thank you.
I'll turn to council. Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I guess I'm not. I don't feel that. I don't know what new is going to come from APC. I'm not understanding what else would come from APC that would make us do anything different. I think staff have done a good job on the report and the options, and they've gone back to the client, the petitioner, to ask them to make some adjustments, and they just seem set on, no, this is what they want to do. Unless council thinks that they would actually change their mind, I don't see that APC, what additional value they would bring to the discussion. And it puts the petitioner in a position where they have to wait even longer to wait for this to go to APC. This may drag into the new year. I prefer to go with council's recommendation, send them back to the drawing board so it sounds like it's not that unreasonable to find the extra square footage that staff have mentioned, so that they can get on with this. Otherwise, I just seen it actually being a disadvantage to the applicant to have this dragged on like this. So I'm just in favor of going forward with staff's recommendation, getting them to get on with revising their plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other second-time speakers? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? We have 3 opposed, Councillor Wainwright, Councillor Rintoul, and myself. The motion does carry. Thank you for the discussion this evening, Council. And we have the second recommendation.
I'll move the second recommendation that once the redesign proposal has been received, and if a contravention of the required minimum side exterior setback is still proposed, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 10194 3rd Street be notified regarding development variance application number DV 100298 to vary the required minimum side exterior setback, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? None opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to item 6, which is the adoption of minutes. We have two sets of minutes, those of our regular council meeting of November 23rd and those of our council organizational meeting of December 7th.
I'll move both sets of minutes be adopted.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. I'll turn to my mayor's report, and I have two topics this evening. The first is I would like to take this opportunity to highlight and speak to a key priority in the town's, our current strategic plan. And this priority, which is under the pillar of community engagement, is collaboration with neighboring local governments. And I was reminded of this particular strategic priority recently when I recently came across in the December 3rd edition of the PNR a notice of public hearing for proposed amendments to the District of North Saanach's zoning bylaw. And the lands being considered for rezoning are located on MacDonald Park Road, which, as members of the public will know, is the boundary between Sydney and North Saanich. Our boundary goes down the middle of MacDonald Park Road in West Sydney. And as to be expected, our planning department received a referral on the proposed rezoning by North Saanich planning staff to see if Sydney had any comments or concerns, to which our staff in turn responded by indicating that we had no concerns. And while this type of referral between the two municipalities is somewhat common, and we know for a number of decades now that Sydney and North Saanich and together on a number of initiatives with Central Saanich work together on a number of important services to the residents of our community in the peninsula. For example, the Water and the Wastewater Commission. For example, the Peninsula Recreation Commission and the facilities in other communities. Sydney and North Saanich are significant funders to the Mary Winspear Centre and the Blue Heron Park. We jointly provide the library service to our residents. We support the Sydney and North Saanich RCMP detachment together. And we have automatic aid agreements between our three fire departments on the peninsula. And while all of that is in place, while reflecting over the past year, I believe the level of collaboration in 2020 reached new highs. And yes, it was partly due to COVID. Examples include increased communication and collaboration between our two administrators, our fire departments and emergency management, our planning departments, and in particular, all three municipalities are currently undergoing OCP reviews. We have hired the same consultant, and our planning staff have met to discuss in ways that we haven't done before with regards to our OCP review processes. And our other significant departments, the directors of finance and our engineering departments, have also been in contact with their collaboration with their colleagues. And further dialogue between our respective councillors, and in particular the mayors. I want to thank Mayor Ryan Windsor of Central Saanich and Mayor Jeff Orr of North Saanich, have been frequent on a myriad of topics and issues. And this year, for example, apart from the response, and in particular with the increased communication when our EOS Emergency Operations Centers were up and running, Sydney, North Saanich, and the Victoria Airport Authority have collaborated earlier this year to do a transportation study, an important transportation study in West Sydney. Sydney has supported North Saanich in this year's grant application for a turf field for Peninsula Soccer in Blue Heron Park. And Sydney and North Saanich, together with School District 63 Parkland School, have supported the Memorial Park Society's grant application for a new track facility at Parkland. Again, an important amenity for our Peninsula residents. So from my perspective, I think all of this bodes well for meeting or exceeding this important ongoing strategic priority, and I look forward to continuing to work together at all levels in our municipalities. The second is, as we enter what is traditionally the most social time of the year, our Christmas holiday season and New Year's celebrations, we look back and know 2020 has been an incredibly challenging year due to COVID. In my role as mayor, I have seen what was already a remarkable community become even more remarkable. We have met one of the biggest challenges imaginable. We have reduced our social interaction in our families, with our friends, in our employments, in our economy, and in our community organizations. We've adapted and become creative to stay engaged and to accomplish the things that need to be done. We have supported each other, and we've become more resilient. And with the significant success we have had in following the direction from our health authorities and the positive news about vaccines, we should all have a renewed hope that 2021 will be a better year. We will emerge from this pandemic a better, stronger, and more resilient community. I want to thank town staff for their remarkable work to continue delivering the important services our community expect, and to thank my council colleagues for their ongoing work and thoughtful deliberations on the wide range of council business that comes on to our agenda, and the work done in over 30 other committees, commissions, and boards that we serve on. I believe we have worked well for our residents. And thank you to members of the public who have supported each other and volunteered in dozens of community organizations that enhance our quality of life. I wish everyone a peaceful and joyous holiday season and a healthy and prosperous new year. Thank you. I'll next turn to committee reports, and the first we have this evening, I'll turn to Councillor Duncan with regards to the Emergency Planning Committee.
Thank you. I move the recommendation that the minutes be received.
Okay, and we have the minutes from the two meetings, September 16th and 21st.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Not opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett with regards to the COVID-19 Recovery Task Force.
I'll move recommendation that the report is received for information.
Second.
The minutes, sorry.
Yeah, the minutes. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And Councillor Wainwright, the Beacon Wharf Select Committee.
I'll move the minutes be received.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to staff reports. We have 5 staff reports this evening, and the first is the cannabis retail license application for 2459 Beacon Avenue. It's the Seed and Stone is the applicant, and we have a report from staff dated December 8th, and we had the presentation earlier this evening with a recommendation as per the report. I will turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll defer to Mr. Newcomb, who I believe is on the Zoom call.
I am here. I can't start my video, unfortunately. I'm not sure why, but I will speak. I hope everyone can hear me.
We can hear you, Mr. Newcomb. Welcome. Please proceed.
Thank you. Yes, so this is a cannabis retail store referral from the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, who I will refer to as the LCRB from here on in. And it's for 2459 Beacon Avenue, the former Village Gallery location. And it's for the store called Seed and Stone. So this is just an initial report and to provide some options on the referral at this stage. And as council can see from the letter from the LCRB attached to the report, this is just an initial referral, and council essentially has a bit of a decision point at this early stage. The first option is to give further consideration to the referral, and there's a number of ways that that could happen. And the second option is to respond to the LCRB stating that the town is not going to be making a recommendation on this referral. And as per their letter, that would essentially end the referral process and put a stop to the application on their end. So in the last 2 instances when we've received a referral of this type, what staff have done is do a preliminary analysis based on the information available at hand at that time. And that's essentially, because we haven't received a full application package on the referral, and it's just the initial stages, really the only information we have to analyze is the proposed location of the store. So that's what we've done in this case, and we've referred to the town's liquor and cannabis licensing policy to assist in this process. So the location section in the policy does have 3 items for consideration. One is that the location be zoned for cannabis retail, which it is in this case. Another is that only 1 cannabis retailer be permitted per lot, which would be the case here as well. And the third item for consideration is the council will consider the impact of the cannabis retailer when they are located with 100 meters of, and then there's a list of what I'll just refer to as sensitive uses. And those include other cannabis retailers, liquor stores, childcare facilities, daycares, educational facilities, libraries, public recreation centers, and so forth. Sort of family-oriented public uses, as well as cannabis and liquor retailers. So in doing the analysis for the 100-meter buffer area, there are two uses that fit those kind of sensitive use categories. One is Sydney Museum, which is on the same side of the street of Beacon Avenue and one block over. Staff don't have any particular concerns there. There's no sort of direct immediate line of sight for people entering or exiting the museum vis-a-vis this proposed location. So not too many concerns there. The other one is that within the 100-meter radius, there is an active cannabis retail store referral already at 9774 3rd Street. And council will remember this came before them a few months ago. It's GEMA Retail Corporation. And the town responded to the LCRB in that instance and indicated that we would consider the referral once the LCRB completes their fit and proper assessment, which, as the gentleman referred to earlier tonight, can take 6 months, give or take. The LCRB is never clear on what that timeline is, but indications point to around 6 months. So in reviewing that pending cannabis retail store within the 100-meter area and the impact it will have, staff referred to the information that we received from Island Health when we were developing this policy, which was that municipalities should give consideration to the density of cannabis retail stores in their community. And in a letter we received from Island Health, also attached to this report, they had suggested that an appropriate distance to reduce the density of cannabis retail stores was 300 meters. But they acknowledged that not every community is the same and different urban forms might demand a different distance. And so staff took that information, and given downtown Sydney's relatively small size and the need to ensure that there was a sufficient number of either vacant or willing retail spaces for potential cannabis retailers to go into, staff proposed 100 meters, which was eventually adopted into the policy. And 100 meters is roughly one per block, to give you a sense of what kind of density that distance would allow. And not surprisingly, this would be this particular referral would lead to there being 2 in this block. So that's sort of, I guess you could consider that going contrary to the policy. So based on this, staff have proposed 3 options for council to consider. The first is, again, essentially ending the application. So making a response to the LCRB that the town will not be making a recommendation on this referral. Option 2 would be very similar to the path taken by council in the previous 2 referrals, which are indicating back to the LCRB that we would like them to complete their fit and proper assessment before proceeding with this, with further consideration of this referral. And option 3 is to essentially defer the referral to a later date, postpone it until a decision is made on the pending location around the corner at 9774 3rd Street, so the GEMA Retail Corporation proposal. Because staff don't believe it's, so the 300 meters proposed by Island Health is obviously what their proposed sort of minimum distance was. Staff took that and tried to fit it into Sydney's context, but we do believe that that 100-meter distance is sort of a minimum floor that the town, that does work with the town's context. We also believe that it would be unfair to applicants to sort of make them wait, 6 months plus 6 months for the fit and proper assessment by the LCRB plus the town's own assessment time, which could be several more months, and there may be lease payments and things like that without any surety of being successful in the referral. So at this time, staff is recommending that the no recommendation response be taken to not get into the position of having to consider two active cannabis retail store referrals that have gone quite a ways down the referral path, and then having to sort of choose between them at a later date. So I'll leave my comments there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to colleagues for questions, and I'll first turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Newcomb, for the report. I was pleased to see the staff recommendation at the conclusion of the report. It interests me in terms of your assessment. You noted the museum as an example when we're talking about proximity within 100 meters. I don't see it in the report, but do staff give consideration to other retail businesses, for example, that perhaps cater to families with young children or young children in general? Because I think I can think of two retail locations within line of sight that definitely cater to young children. So my question to the staff is, does the neighboring retailers factor into staff's assessment process?
Thank you for the question. Generally, the answer is no. I think the appropriate time to consider for staff anyway, the appropriate time to consider the opinion of other retailers would be further down the road in the process, when council might choose to do a mail out and notify those retailers and get their feedback on it. But because they're not strictly listed in that, I'll call them again, sensitive uses list, we don't consider them in this particular analysis tonight.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, I am considering it tonight, just to be clear. And with respect to the process, and I'm not sure if you'll know the answer to this, Mr. Newcomb, but whether or not applicants have access to information based on other applicants that have come before the town, because this is the fourth LCRB application we've seen for a town with a population of 11,672 people. A portion of that demographic might be interested in shopping in this environment. Is that information available? I'm assuming the council proceedings are certainly publicly available. Do the LCRB share that information with applicants in terms of letting them know? Seems to me that it would be a situation that's untenable, and I'm surprised that businesses are still giving this active consideration, considering there are another two already in process with the LCRB. Can you comment on that at all?
Based on my interactions with the LCRB, I don't believe they provide information to applicants on other applicants. I don't know that for sure, but that's my sense based on numerous conversations with various licensing analysts there. In some cases, you have different licensing analysts working on applications within the same community, and it seems they don't always talk. So my guess is no. I don't know that for sure, however.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb.
So just a quick follow-up. I do try to, when discussing, quite often I'll receive phone calls from new applicants. I do try to make them aware of other locations so that they can judge accordingly whether or not the location that they're considering might be appropriate or not. And I also make them aware of the 100-meter radius. I believe in this case, my sense is that they may have been considering this location prior to the 9774 3rd Street location coming in, but I don't know that for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Actually, Mr. Newcomb just answered my question, which was if applicants who were pondering opening a store would be provided with information of other applications that are in process. So he answered that fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan?
I didn't have my hand up.
Okay, sorry. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are two possibilities that I could support. One of them is that we would respond to LCRB and simply say we're not going to process any more cannabis retail applications until the ones that were already in front of us are dealt with. So not just 9774, but like the other ones that are pending as well. And that to me is a pretty reasonable thing. I appreciate it leaves the proponent hanging, possibly withholding costs, waiting to see what happens. But that does seem to be a standard element of the business. And every other application that's in line in front of them has had a pretty lengthy period where they had holding costs. I would also be okay with just flatly saying we're not going to comment, simply from that rationale of wanting to minimize their holding costs, and sometimes it's you're doing them a favor by saying no early. But I think my preference would be to tell LCRB that we're not going to comment on any more applications until the ones that have already been in front of council are fully resolved.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan.
My apologies. I thought we were still asking just questions through the staff. Are we into discussion on the recommendation, which recommendation we're going to go on now?
Thank you, Councillor, which raises a good point. I think now if we are just in more discussion rather than questions, we should go to motions. And so I'll ask Council if there are any questions of staff. Councillor O'Keefe?
No, I didn't have a question. I was just going to move ahead with the motion.
Please proceed.
Okay. I'll move the staff recommendation that staff be directed to respond to the Liquor and Cannabis Licensing Branch, indicating that the Town of Sydney will not be making a recommendation on the cannabis retail store license referral for 2459 Beacon Avenue, Seed and Stone.
Second.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we haven't moved and seconded. Mr. Newcomb.
I'm sorry, there's an error in the recommendation there. It should be Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, not Licensing Branch. I apologize for that.
Okay, we can tidy that up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we'll turn to discussion with the motion on the floor. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I am glad that Councillor Rantoul asked the detailed questions he did about how applicants or what information applicants might have before they come forward, because I wondered the same question, and and even if they had somehow started this application before realizing the other applications were going in, and so they had not seen in the council discussion records, being able to find that online in the minutes that these other applications were in, surely if they were doing their market research on what type of town this was and what the market might be, they would have come across many news articles about cannabis in this town, and they would have all focused on the fact, I mean, some of them are just against cannabis in general, but the majority of it, and particularly the debate on council, was that it was on Beacon Avenue. And so then to come forward with a proposal after all that with an application on Beacon Avenue again, I thought was kind of demonstrating unfamiliarity with the town. And they may be great business owners, and it sounds like they really, take pride in that. But they might not really understand the Sydney business environment if they were going to come forward with that at this point. And that makes me question. Strangely enough, there is also a Buddha statue in the picture that they have in their proposal of their store. And oh, I thought that wasn't going to go over well either. So I am, definitely in favor of the staff recommendation as it is, that I can't see an eventuality of if we had deferred and let them go through the application, that this would ever have been approved, regardless of whether the other applications didn't go through or not, and we only still had one in town. In Sydney, I don't think that the second store can in good faith go on Beacon Avenue after what we heard from the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers, I'll make my comments now, and that is that the situation, we've talked about what the proponent may or may not know. We know what is public. We know that that has gone, the business that has transpired through council, and that is that we do have one license approved and operating, and we have two license applications that have come before us. They did not come forward at the same time. They came slightly spread apart, and in both cases, council told the LCRB that we wanted a fit and proper assessment completed before we would consider the application further. We do know that that will take a number of months, may take several months, and I would hope that the fourth applicant, the one that came before us tonight, is on our agenda, would be aware of those circumstances, and would also be aware of our policy. And as staff have presented in the report, the policy, our current policy for considering applications is with regards to having a 100-meter buffer, as well as the reference, which is in our agenda package, again, the letter from Island Health with regards to the rationale for having buffers. So council is not in particular giving its reasons, or is required to give its reasons for why it would not consider a fourth application at present, whether it's Beacon Avenue, whether it's the fourth application, whether it's the 100-meter buffer. What's important to the proponent is the staff recommendation, and whether council supports approving it at this time. And what I see is that if we tell the if we motion to tell the LCRB that we will not be making a recommendation, that this closes that application. And a scenario that could unfold is that the other two applications that are currently undergoing a fit and proper assessment may in fact not receive a fit and proper assessment, and thus this outstanding application, if we left it outstanding, would be a second applicant or a third applicant, and the buffer would not even apply in that case to another cannabis location, not necessarily to other uses. So I think if we were to motion this evening to tell the LCRB that we will not be giving further consideration to this or any further applications until such time as the first two have resolved, the applicant, we're not imposing further costs on the applicant. They know the council, they know council's decision. They realize, or will then appreciate, if they don't now, that council will be considering those applications which are undergoing fit and proper assessments before we will consider this application. And they can choose to wait and incur any costs if that's necessary, or withdraw. But for us to end it, I think, does not leave all reasonable options available to this fourth applicant. So I'm in favor of the recommendation to advise the LCRB that we will not consider this or further applications until we consider the two applications that are outstanding and we've previously decided on. I'll turn to colleagues if there's any further discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Wainwright and myself are opposed, and the motion carries. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Follow-up motion.
Yes. A motion arising. Go ahead, Councillor.
I'm not unhappy with the decision council's just made, but I do think it is worthwhile for council to advise LCRB that we're not going to comment on any more applications until the ones that are already in front of us are resolved. I do not want to see another application come in like a week from now. We might as well just tell them to not do that. So I'd like to make that motion, please.
Okay, could you just word it again, Councillor?
Okay, that staff be directed to respond to the LCRB indicating that the town of Sydney will not comment on any further applications for cannabis retail store licenses until the applications that are already being considered by the town are fully processed.
I'll second that.
Seconder, do you wish to motivate further, Councillor Henry?
I think it's pretty clear.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, I agree with what's being proposed. The only thing that I'm wondering, and maybe staff could comment, is whether the LCRB and whether ourselves are tied to particular legislation or regulations. So whether the LCRB might say, okay, well, it's nice for you to say that. However, the legislation requires that if we receive an application, we have to notify you of it. So that's, my only sort of misgiving about it in terms of process.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn that to a question to staff if they wish to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not aware of any specific legislation like the type you referred to, Councillor O'Keefe. That being said, I'm not sure how the LCRB would respond to that. What I do know for sure is that Council has the power to delegate decisions on LCRB license referrals to staff. And I think a sure way to do this might be to direct staff to indicate to the LCRB that the town will not be making further comments on any further recommendations on cannabis retail store license referrals until such time that the two in-stream ones are processed. That would essentially give staff the delegated authority to do that for a specific period of time, which I know the LCRB does accept because in their guide, they specifically say, that power may be delegated to staff. And if it is, please let us know so that we can be sure that we're responding to referrals in the proper way.
So thank you, Mr. Newcomb. So if I could ask Mr. Newcomb, does the motion, Councillor Wainwright, we have on the floor not state that in the manner that you are suggesting?
Actually, I guess it does. Looking at it, essentially, yes.
Okay, thank you. I mean, if you have a suggestion, we're certainly open to that. Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, my question was whether staff needs a separate motion from us delegating that that ability to make that decision for any. So if the LCRB comes back and says, okay, it's fine that you're not going to consider these, we still have to send them to you anyways, but that we are delegating our staff to respond to those by saying we won't be providing any comment or considering this further.
Okay,
I guess what I'm wondering is another motion required to delegate that authority to staff?
Okay, if I could turn that into a slightly altered question, does this motion not give that authority to staff? If council passed the resolution, staff would be executing that resolution if an application were to come forward, be referred from LCRB. Turn to staff.
I was actually going to refer this question over to maybe Ms. Nelson or Mr. Humble. I'm not sure if this would qualify as something requiring a delegation bylaw, actually, or if the resolution itself would be sufficient.
Through the mayor, I believe by resolution is appropriate. I would say that it might be worthwhile to perhaps amend that motion slightly along the lines that staff be delegated the authority to further write to the LCRB that the town will not. I think having the words delegation to staff in that motion might be prudent in this particular case.
Okay. Would the mover consider and seconder consider that amendment?
I'm agreeable.
That's fine.
And the seconder, okay. And so, Ms. Nelson, do you have that that you could read back to council?
Okay, that staff be delegated the authority to advise the LCRB that the town will not comment on any further cannabis retail applications until the others being considered by the town have been processed.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. So we have that moved and seconded, and I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question through to staff with respect to communication with licensing on this matter. I wouldn't like to see this necessarily send a mixed message in relation to the motion council just passed based on the staff recommendation. And so question through to the CAO or to Mr. Newcomb, this would be communicated under separate cover, I assume, from the town to the LCRB. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you,
okay.
Thanks, Mr. Rintoul.
I think I understand the intent. I appreciate the intent. I'm going to support it. But again, I hope it doesn't send the wrong message to the applicant that we've just addressed that file. To me, these are two very separate, distinct discussions, and I hope that's not lost as part of communicating with LCRB. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Further discussion on the motion? Call the question. All in favor? We have none opposed. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. So that was a motion arising. We'll now turn to 13B, which is options for pickleball court locations. We have a report from staff dated December 9th, and I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Through the mayor to all of council. So this report is a response to a resolution that council made when the Saanich Peninsula Pickleball Association presented a couple weeks ago, I guess a few weeks ago at this point. So staff looked at several locations that were identified as potential pickleball locations in the parks master plan, and also some other parks that weren't identified. And in the end, we ended up circling back and having Breathitt Park as the preferred location. There's enough space at Breathitt Park for pickleball and enough space to also plant some trees around as a buffer for the residents in the area. Although there's no washroom facilities, there's room for them, and there's also lots of parking, which is an issue with many of the parks in Sydney. So holding pickleball tournaments in a space where there's just no parking and all the players will be parking in small residential neighborhoods, it's kind of a recipe for disaster. So that is the recommendation, that the pickleball courts eventually be constructed in Breathitt Park. Something else, the Saanich Peninsula Pickleball Association wanted the facility to be constructed by the summer of 2021. Just because of the level of design actually required at Breathitt Park, there needs to be some drainage improvements. If we are going to put in a washroom there, we need to know where it's going to be and what connections are going to be used before we go and actually install a pickleball facility, just to make sure the park is actually designed properly. So we're recommending that design happens in 2021 and then the installation actually happens in 2022.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. Are there any questions before we go to motions? And we should keep it to questions if we can. I saw two hands at once. I'll go to Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Garnett.
Thank you. Actually, I'm just thinking about, so the 6 pickleball courts, that's for, they want 6 to be able to provide, have tournaments. Is that correct? That's sort of the minimum number to accommodate tournaments would be 6?
Correct. That's my understanding of it.
Okay. And so I also, appreciate staff's comment about, if there were to be pickleball tournaments at Breath Hour Park, I mean, there's some parking there, but that would have a significant impact on the surrounding neighborhood. So I'm wondering if we might consider a fewer number of pickleball courts to at least, provide recreational pickleball. It might not be enough for tournaments, whether that might be deemed a suitable option or not, if you have any comment on that.
Sure. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, that was something that the Saanich Peninsula Pickleball Association was asking for, specifically enough space to hold tournaments. And it was also something identified in the Parks Master Plan to have kind of a dedicated pickleball facility. So that's where that came from. But absolutely, if council, would prefer to do a smaller facility with potentially even the ability to do smaller tournaments, still, that would be something that could be considered.
Just a follow-up, if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please proceed.
I'm just looking at the diagram for Breath Hour Park, and I don't recall was there arrangements going to be made there for additional car parking, or would it just be those existing sort of spots that are off of Breath Hour Parkway?
Through the mayor to...
yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, we looked at that quickly, but we think that the parking will need to be adjusted a little bit to make it safer for people to enter and exit onto Ocean Avenue, because it can get busy at times. But the idea wouldn't be to add parking. It might be just to modify the layout a little bit to make it safer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wasn't a question I was originally asked, but you sort of prompted it. Modify in what particular way do you envision?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett. So it would be looking at maybe more angled parking, like more, right now it's kind of a free-for-all. There's no lines or anything on there. So making it angled parking so people could, back out on an angle. We might need to take over a little bit more of the park space, so move it a little bit more south, just so that there's room to actually back out without backing out right onto the street. We would have to look at that again. That's partly why we would like to look at detailed design this year, because there are quite a bit of improvements that could be made at this park if we do it properly and have a design all at once, and then build on the design that we have.
Follow-up, if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
The reference to budgeting $250,000 for construction, was that intended to be for 6 courts?
Yes. So in the Parks concept plans, the consultant did a bit of an estimate. They estimated between $35,000 and $60,000 per court. So that was kind of a rough estimate from that estimate from the Parks concept plans. For 6 courts. Yes.
Thank you. I think given that's an estimate of about 42,000 and it's 35 to 60, I'd be a little more comfortable if we were going that route, that if we had a little more in the budget for it, just because things never are as easy as you think they're going to be. And so, I'd like to rather have a little more wiggle room set aside to start with than having to come back to ask for more sort of scenario. But other than that, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Feld and Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. If I may, through you to Ms. Clary, Thank you very much for this report. It's a great report, and I love the layout of for Brethra Park. I do have, yeah, and you've addressed it to a point. The parking is for me a really big concern. People tend to drive forward into their parking spots and back out, even in their own driveways. And to envision a significant number of vehicles backing out to that roadway, which has children waiting for the school bus and regular transit. So that needs to be addressed if we are to consider it. I'm going to go back to the chart that you have created for the different parks and look at Resthaven Park. If we were to put pickleball at Resthaven, are you there anticipating a couple of courts, or were you looking at the full 6 courts at Resthaven?
Again, I'll go back to what was requested from the association was the 6 courts for tournament play. Again, we could look at doing something smaller, something that wasn't really outlined about Resthaven, which I am concerned about, is you know, we wouldn't be able to plant as many trees in that area to buffer. And I don't know if the sound of pickleball would just go and resonate across the bay. I am a little bit concerned about that, and that's something that would need to be investigated a little bit further if we were going to look at Resthaven.
Okay, thank you. Because in the chart, Resthaven Park is the one that hits the space for the courts, available parking, existing bathrooms, not surrounded by residential, and identified as potential. So it would reduce a certain level of the cost because it already has the bathrooms there and whatnot. So I support the noise factor over the water. I think that is an issue. Putting this into Brethra Park, which right now is a fairly raw facility, so everything has to be done from square one, and it's going to be an expensive project. But I think we really need to give some more thought to available parking. Even though we're talking about people using alternatives to vehicle, it's on a bus line and whatnot, there's going to be a certain level of parking, and I don't think the existing parking right here is going to meet the new demand of this park. We've also got the dog walkers there, or the dog play area, and I know right now it's being used quite a bit for people having a controlled area for their dogs. So parking for me is a big concern on this one, and I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Ms. Clary, for the report. I was very impressed with how quickly this came back to Council, appreciating that what we're looking here is to move some figures into the budget, and that all we're doing tonight is really authorizing the process to be considered through budget deliberations. So regardless in terms of what happens, I recognize that Council will still have a decision to make. With regard to that, the Mayor spoke during his Mayor's report with regard to the cooperation we're seeing between municipalities. I recollect the District of North Saanich installed pickleball courts at Wayne Road Park, I believe is the name of the park, close to Birch. Have we reached out to North Saanich to determine whether or not utilization of that facility is maxed out to the extent that there is indeed a need for more pickleball courts, or is this perhaps a matter of convenience for pickleball players in terms of an additional facility in Sydney?
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, I haven't reached out to North Saanich specifically about the use of these courts. My understanding is they are fairly well used, and during winter months they're not used as much, is my understanding of them. But we can definitely do that. Again, this is based on the request from the Pickleball Association, who were saying that they need more courts, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. That's fine.
No, thank you, and I appreciate that. And I think a number of facilities on the peninsula are shared in nature, and that definitely part of preparing, our position to move this to budget should be assessing particularly that facility because it's new. I believe it's 6 courts. It's not less than 6 courts, I would suggest. And so we can probably learn something from them. Excuse me. Is it envisioned by staff whether or not there's any additional costs in relation to operating this that might not be something we've undertaken previously? And by that, I mean programming the space. 6 courts, is there envisioned to be a reservation system, not just at times of tournament, or do we just put a sign up that says it's yours if it's available? How does the public access it fairly, in addition to the association with respect to potential operational implications longer term?
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, we don't have any of those programs for courts, but we do have use agreements for Iroquois Park for the soccer field. So we could look at doing something similar to that. I guess we, as a town, we don't have, in-house staff to manage those, like the actual scheduling of the park to great detail. So we would kind of count on the association to pick that up and do the managing of the scheduling for it.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Mayor, if I may, finally, Ms. Clary, my recollection of the presentation was there was some discussion around the association putting some funding forward. Your report acknowledges that certainly. Was there any follow-up with the association prior to the report in terms of what that dollar contribution could look like? Because certainly I would be uncomfortable when we get to budget time if we don't have a hard dollar contribution from the association that they're going to put into this, since they are the user group motivating this project. Has there been any further clarification or discussion on that site with the association?
I would have to refer to Mr. Hissick on that. I don't believe a hard dollar value was mentioned, but perhaps Mr. Hissick knows more about that.
Through the chair, we have not had any discussions with them about this particular location. If council approves it, then we would feel empowered to have those discussions ahead of budget.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And not a question, Mr. Mayor, but a comment. I think moving this forward to budget deliberation means, a lot of those items would need to be addressed. And from my perspective, certainly funding from the association firmed up as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to you, to staff. I don't know if you'll know this or not, but I'm thinking in regards to when we did the consultation for the parks master plan and the idea of having pickleball courts, I just recall anecdotal information that the pickleball people came out in great numbers to provide support for pickleball courts at Brethard Park. And just anecdotal, and then people in the surrounding neighborhood not being all that in favor of it. So I don't know whether, when we gather feedback, do we have any kind of sense about whether the surrounding neighborhood was actually in favor of pickleball courts, or was there just a very successful lobby from those who like pickleball to do that? And I note that you've made comments about having trees for buffer, but I guess I'm wondering also, if this were to move forward, would we have any further consultations with the neighborhood to say, is this something that you're going to support, or are we sort of feeling that consultation took place through the parks master plan?
We could definitely look at some additional engagement in 2021 if the plan to do design in 2021 and then construction in 2022 is acceptable. Yeah, the parks concept plans, I believe, mention that, you know, there's strong support for Breather Park and then some opposition as well. So yes, it would be interesting to know if that opposition was specifically from the people who lived right around it. So we could as we get kind of more of a detailed concept sketch, we could present that to the neighborhood and hear what they have to say back.
And just one more, if I may, Mr. Mayor. I'm thinking about the other big recreational facilities that are going to be going up in our neighborhood, not in Sydney, but you know, the Blue Heron Turf Field, the Peninsula Track, and we've already had the Soccer Association come to us to say, here's what our contribution will be. They've already got a significant amount aside. So I wonder if staff, in comparing those scenarios, whether you think we're better to, you know, wait for the Pickleball Association to have a firm commitment in terms of some money in the bank, so to speak, just as the Soccer Association did before coming to us to look for assistance.
Is that a question, Councillor O'Keefe?
I guess it's a comment, maybe a question. If staff care to comment one way or the other, if they think.
I didn't particularly hear a question, so.
Okay.
Staff wishes to comment. That's okay. I'll speak for a moment. This is a complicated one for me. When the Pickleball Association came forward, they spoke, having consulted with the Tennis Association, appreciating that there are tennis players outside of the Tennis Association. But I'm surprised, quite frankly, that given the proposal that the Pickleball Association has brought forward for Iroquois Park, that we have not heard a word from tennis players or the Tennis Association. We did have one or two respondents at the time that they made their application, but that is certainly not significant in terms of a response from that community. I know a council colleague member at the previous meeting made a comment that they thought the courts were used on a somewhat frequent basis. My observation is otherwise, but I wouldn't take my observation as evidence. But I'm surprised that the association or members, the tennis players, have not come forward. I appreciate the staff report. It's certainly a fulsome report and does speak to multiple uses at the park, although the other uses in terms of Waterspray Park are at the times that soccer is used, you know, are at various times, and I think that hopefully the park could accommodate the additional use. I'm in favor of moving this forward to budget deliberations. However, to again a councillor colleague comment is I would actually prefer to see public comment from the Breathitt neighborhood on this proposal or the details that are available to date prior to deliberating during budget deliberations. So I would ask staff for their comment on that in terms of that's a reasonable process. I realize it's something that needs to be prepared for, but to consider a $250,000 budget allocation without having any input from the community first, I'll turn to staff.
It's a bit of a challenge in terms of the iterative process. Ideally, we would have the concept of a park in that location tentatively approved by council, and then we could potentially consult on it. But it sounds like you're proposing that we consult before we budget for it. I suppose that could be done.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I just think about the time frame between when we would have to put together a consultation process, reach out to the neighborhood, have some level of meaningful consultation, review that feedback and prepare for budget. I quite frankly think it's a bit of a challenge.
Okay, if I might, just before going back to staff, in the recommendation here is that we budget $30,000 for design costs. To spend $30,000 on a design cost, then go to the public, and if the public are vehemently opposed to it, and we have issues, some members of council, including myself, have concerns over parking, I think some preliminary consultation prior to spending significant sums is warranted. But I'll turn it back to you, staff. You did want to speak further.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The concept of a dog park potentially at Rest Haven is another example where consultation would likely occur. The way I see this rolling out is it's included in the budget, and that is the trigger for consultation. We would likely undertake some level of consultation before we spend significant amounts on design, and maybe approaching it that way would be the best way to go.
Okay, I appreciate that answer, and I can accept that and move forward that way. My other comments with regards to the two locations, that is Iroquois Park and Breathitt, is I have, before considering it a budget deliberations, I would want to know more in terms of the parking arrangement and how many parking spaces are anticipated. You know, I understand that on six pickleball courts, that's 24 players. I'm not suggesting there'll be 24 cars in non-COVID times, but if they're having a tournament, it's going to be very, very significant for that neighborhood. And I realize there aren't tournaments every week, but I would want to know more in terms of the parking requirement. So in the staff report, we're looking at a budgeting for a $30,000 design work in 2021. We're looking at $250,000 for the construction of the courts in 2022. It doesn't speak to the cost that might be associated with altering the parking. It also doesn't speak to the consideration of whether washrooms are really, in council's opinion or staff's opinion, necessary for a pickleball facility in that location. The Pickleball Association has certainly expressed an interest in having washroom facilities at whatever location they play at. And I think we should be considering that cost as well in that. But in terms of moving this forward to budget deliberations, I'm prepared to do that. But quite frankly, I would want to move this report to those budget deliberations, and I wouldn't at this stage rule out Iroquois Park. I would like to hear more from the Tennis Association. If they don't have objections, I would like to consider Iroquois Park further. I would also like to consider the option of there being 4 courts instead of 6 courts, which would reduce the demand on number of players, appreciating that the facility in North Saanich can accommodate a tournament. And I don't know that there would be 2 tournaments going on simultaneously on the peninsula. So those are some of my thoughts. I'll turn it back to any second-time speakers. Councillor Garnett.
Sorry, are we still asking questions, or are we doing the comment section? I kind of got lost there. So is it okay to make comments? 'Cause
I'm sorry, I broke my own guidance in terms of getting into deliberation when that's the risk when we proceed with questions. And but I would now ask council to consider a motion.
Perhaps I'll try this, and happy to see it wordsmithed by others. The council, I'm going to break it into 2 for starters, 2 motions. One, that council direct staff to bring forward a 2021 budget item for community consultation and design of park amenities to include up to 6 pickleball courts and public washroom facilities.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Discussion, Councillor Runtoul to motivate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was prepared to move the motion, the first motion, as recommended, with the addition of the community consultation piece, which would have included referencing Breathitt Park specifically. But I think you raised a good point that we may limit ourselves. I think the challenge with the motion as it has now been worded, however, is that it's probably very, very difficult for staff to do any design, not having a location identified, frankly. So I'm struggling with the motion myself. I would like staff to also comment on it in the event it is too vague and the location should indeed be named. But I should note that I'm comfortable seeing money set aside in 2021 to move this forward. I'm not necessarily comfortable with the second suggested motion here, that we're signaling to the community that, yeah, we're going to do this and build it, because I'm not there yet. But I'll leave it there for the moment, Mr. Mayor.
So we do have one of the two recommendations made and seconded. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm feeling that we're not ready to do this yet. I think, in the scheme of the other priorities we have, staff have still lots to do on the OCP, a number of other projects. Like I said, the soccer people are looking to us for money as well. There's still lots of questions about consultation to be done around Breathitt Park, the parking. I would love it if we had a place that we could go ahead and do this, but we're a small municipality with a small footprint with limited options, and I just don't think we're in a position at this time to even put any staff's time into this at this time. And I guess I'd kind of like to give staff the time to sort of pick ourselves up from this difficult year that we've had, get the ship sort of righted again, and finish the OCP review and look at, maybe take a look at this next year. In that time, I would also hope that the Pickleball Association would have put their minds to some fundraising, and I would be more inclined to support something when I see that they have actually put some fundraising into this and have significant funds to put towards it, just as the Soccer Association has. So I think I'd be inclined to vote against the recommendation at this time and leaning more to, let's take a look at it next year. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn it to Mr. Hisik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hear all the comments from the various members of council. Just with respect to the fundraising, what we have heard from the Pickleball Association is that they cannot begin in earnest until we have a chosen site. And another reason for that is that they are expecting the town to issue tax-deductible donations for the facility, which again we cannot do until it becomes an official town project in our budget.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of comments for my colleagues to consider, having listened to all the discussion previous. And parking is an issue there, so that's been touched on by Councillor Follett and the Mayor and Councillor O'Keefe. As a former resident of that area, unless there's significant modifications done, it's extremely dangerous area to come back and forth. Your visibility is very limited. And I'm also concerned about potential tournaments with 6 courts. And I know full well that people will park on EPCO and Red Wing, which will negatively impact the neighbors. So that's something also to consider. As far as the drop-in open house, I attended that, and I was there for a considerable amount of time. And yes, it was majority of the people that were the positive comments were the pickleball players. This is not anecdotal because I was there and spoke to virtually everybody that came. Surprisingly, there was a lot of people from the neighborhood who came, which was quite impressive because I didn't expect that. And they were not in favor of the pickleball courts going there. So I think the idea that we need to consult with them, I think, is important because there was a lot of negative reaction to that potential happening in that site. So I think the mayor's touched on something that's really important. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul. Sir, you muted, Councillor.
I beg your pardon. I think the motion that I put forward is too vague to be of much use to staff. And frankly, I concur with Councillor O'Keefe's comments. And so I'd rather see us receive this for information. So I'm going to withdraw the motion.
Does the seconder concur?
It seems to me that we should still consider it at budget time. If we say no now, well, then we are in fact putting it off for a year. You're going to have to do the consultation with the neighborhood. I don't know. It seems to make sense to move the process forward rather than defer it for a year.
I would concur with Councillor Wainwright. I think with the motion on the floor, if we defeat it and leave it open-ended, it's not going to come forward at all during the budget deliberations, and we're waiting a year. And the pickleball folks are going to come back and ask us about process. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I've been listening to the conversation of between my colleagues. I think I've changed my mind 4 times. I like what Councillor O'Keefe has said, and I know Councillor Rintoul is now having second thoughts about his motion, but looking at it and thinking that within our Parks Master Plan, this was a park that came up, pickleball courts were already within that conceptual plan, and I agree with Councillor Wainwright that we might as well bring it forward to budget simply because that's the way this conceptual design was for Breath Hour Park, and which is why I think the staff have continued to bring that forward at this time, is that the Pickleball Association is still kind of keeping up the pressure for those facilities, and that just kind of moving this forward, I think in the way that Councillor Rintoul has phrased it, but it's not that we're building pickleball courts for the pickleballers because they've asked for it now and we've chosen Breath Hour Park, but that we're going to start actually beginning this Breath Hour Park improvement because we have this as the concept that came out of the Parks Master Planning, with the additional engagement that would have had to come out of that anyway. And if it gets to budget, which comes up with fuller discussion about all of the projects that are coming up on the schedule, and then we're kind of really getting into the workload of staff and what we think can actually be accomplished in the next couple of years, and whether there's going to be contractors available. So I'm okay now with having this go forward to budget deliberations within that kind of fuller discussion about the parks planning that we knew was going to be coming up soon anyway for some of these parks, and maybe moving around which ones got improvements first. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So the motion still isn't on the floor. We didn't have the seconder to remove it. Councillor O'Keefe? Councillor O'Keefe, you're muted.
Thank you. No.
Councillor O'Keefe? Councillor O'Keefe?
I think I'm okay now.
Can you hear me, Councillor O'Keefe? Councillor O'Keefe, if we could ask that you turn your video,
I can hear.
Could
can hear it's all.
Could you turn your video off, and that might allow your audio to function better?
Okay. Okay. How's that?
Better.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the reason I'm not in favor of moving it forward to budget is because then, staff have got to spend some time figuring out, okay, how much is it going to cost for 6 pickleball courts? How much is it going to cost for 4 pickleball courts? The cost of the washrooms. And so I think, staff investing a fair amount of time into something that I just don't think is a good fit for Breath Hour Park because of the parking, because of the neighboring area, because of other things that we've got on our plate right now. So I would love it if we had an unlimited amount of time and money to do this, but I just think we're trying to squeeze something in that just doesn't fit in that place. So yeah, I'm fine to let the motion fail and receive it for information for now, and maybe take another run at it next year.
Okay,
Thank you.
Councillor, I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole and then myself.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps we could have Ms. Nelson read back the motion, because I deliberately left out Breather Park in the motion, and I did that because the mayor's comments around exploring through that community consultation piece the prospect of Iroquois as well. And so again, that's my concern, that it may be too vague. Councillor Duncan had some great comments, though, that certainly resonate with me. But if you would please, Ms. Nelson, just reread the motion so that we're all sort of on the same page, please.
Yes, that was my understanding as well, that you left out Breather Park. So what I have down is that staff be directed to bring forward a 2021 budget item for community consultation and design of park amenities, including 6 pickleball courts and public washroom facilities.
Up to 6 pickleball
Up to 6,
courts.
sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'm comfortable with the motion. I don't, this isn't the first time the Pickleball Association or players have come forward to Sydney Council requesting facilities. It is a growing sport on the peninsula, and I think it deserves further consideration. I think staff have invested a significant amount of time based on the presentation that we had previously to bring this report forward, and I don't think the additional time that will be required to bring it to budget deliberations will be significant, and so I am in favor of this of this motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have 1 opposed. Councillor O'Keefe. The motion carries. We did have a comment with regards to the second motion. Is there Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Because the next motion deals with 2022, I don't think there is actually a need to make that motion tonight. That could be made, for example, after budget, if it survives getting through budget. So my suggestion would be, just in the interests of time, that we move on.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no one to move that second recommendation, we shall indeed move on to the next item. Thank you. The next item is item 13C, overnight staffing in response to COVID-19 Fire Department. We have a report dated December 7th, and I would turn to the Chief for an introduction.
Thank you. Through the chair, there's a brief report before you outlining the rationale for overnight staffing at the CSB in response to COVID-19. It is a component of our business continuity plan and is presently being implemented in like municipalities, including Central Saanich, View Royal, and Colwood. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Chief? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I think I had an unstable internet connection or something. So I need some more information to understand the sort of rationale for this. So the way I think I understand it is that we're trying a convergent response. I'm understanding is what takes place when all the, an alarm is sent out, there's a call, and the volunteers all converge at the CSB to respond to that call. And so there's obviously a risk there when you have so many people coming together at one time. And my understanding is that many times, maybe not everybody is needed. If there's sort of minor sort of issues, you don't need multi-apparatus or trucks going out. And so the desire is to have a limited number of firefighters staying at the fire hall to take those calls. So first of all, if you could confirm that I'm understanding that correctly.
Yes, through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, your characterization is dead on. That's exactly, we're trying to institute administrative controls to eliminate, the unnecessary congregation of our first responders.
Okay. Okay, so I got that part down, fine. So what I'm wondering is, why do they need to be on site? So I guess I don't understand, sorry, enough about the operations to, so for example, if a call comes in and it only requires, I don't know, it's a lady's got a cat in a tree or something, or it's a minor incident, you don't need the whole crew coming out. Do we not have the ability to just have, say, 3 or 4 people who were on call for the evening or the weekend, so that when you get those routine calls in, rather than incurring the cost to have those people on site, whether you just can't do a reduced call out to a reduced number of people, if that's possible?
Sure, I understand what you're saying, but we struggle with having, when you're correct that there are a number of calls that do not require a multi-apparatus response, and those are probably the bulk of the emergency calls we do, which are medical emergency calls and the like, and small service calls. Even minor fires only require a single engine response, but we're still asking our volunteers, or 3 or 4 people, just to kind of be available. That's a pretty big ask, is to be available just for that night, and there's likely to be a cost associated with that. Typically we have there's a number of times where, depending on the time of the day and the circumstance, I've done many medical calls by myself. So there's no guarantee that you're going to get a mass convergent response. I wouldn't want to limit the number of people coming to the hall or kind of being on duty, because there's no guarantee that would be sufficient even for the most minor call. It completely depends on the circumstance. So I don't see that being plausible.
I guess, sorry, if I can continue, what I'm not understanding is, we would still, to get to your point, having concern about having people on call for the evening or the weekend or whatever, but and not having enough people, but that's still going to be the case, would it not, if they were actually, if you have these people staying at the fire hall, that the issue is still going to be the same, that there's going to be a cost. People are going to have to commit time, whether it's at the fire hall physically or being on call. And even if they are staying overnight or at the CSB, that it may still be the case that there won't be enough people there, that you will still have to call them out. So I guess I'm not understanding why they have to physically be at the CSB. Why can't they just be at home as usual? And if you don't want a large convergent response for those minor instances, why you can't just make a call out to a fewer number of people, rather than having a call go out to everybody to converge at the CSB?
No, I understand, and I think the issue is this, the idea of just putting it out to a fewer number of people lessens the likelihood we're going to have a sufficient number of people respond. And we're in a time-sensitive business, so if we're going to fund and actually have people on standby, I would much rather have them at the hall and providing prompt service than the delayed requirement of and lag time of having them respond to the hall and then respond afterwards. So if we're going to go to the expense of doing that, I'd much rather have a higher level of service and a prompt service provided.
I guess, but do we not, isn't that how it already works? So that, if there's a call, that convergent response requires everybody under normal circumstances to come into the fire hall anyways.
Yeah, that's the way it works currently, yes, and that's what we're trying
Right.
to avoid. So what happens is, and what we did during when we had our EOC stood up, is we triage the calls, and we have a certain number of calls, medical calls, public assist, small fires, and they only go to a certain set of pagers that are programmed as such, and they're only sent to those pagers that are at the fire hall. So only those members are receiving those calls. So only those 3 or 4 individuals are the only ones that are doing the response. And then only the more higher acuity calls, the structure fires, the smoke and structures, etc., are sent out to the large cohort of volunteers. And under those circumstances, we need them all to come to the fire hall. We're just reducing the number of times they're unnecessarily coming to the fire hall.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that makes sense to me. I guess, you know, I go back to my question again about, so if you can program the pagers to just go to a fewer number of people at the fire hall, at the CSB, you know, yes, it would be nice to have a quicker response, but that's not normally what we would do anyways.
No, it's, yeah, I would agree. It's not normally what we do, but there's lots of things we're not doing normally under the context of COVID right now. And this is, I think, one of those things that we identified to lessen the risk to our people. And, you know, we have long weekend duty crews during the year where we pay people to be on call, and we struggle to get people to sign up for those. Typically myself and the deputy have to take a lot of those shifts just to maintain minimum staffing. So the sustainability of having a minimum crew on a nightly basis coming from home, I don't believe would be sustainable.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. If we could turn to colleagues. I'll just comment that I'm Councillor Fallot, go ahead.
Thank you. So in following this, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chief, for your comments. And if I followed the conversation properly, so it sounds to me like we're looking at changing how we provide emergency services. I think COVID may be an extenuating circumstance here, but it looks to me like really what we're looking at what we're asking is staffing the fire hall.
No.
Would that be accurate?
No, it's through the chair to Councillor Fell. That would be inaccurate. We need to look at this through the lens. This is a temporary measure. You know, this council report speaks to a temporary measure to put people in the building on a temporary basis or until the COVID risk abates, so we don't have the congregate group of first responders coming and potentially infecting each other. Once that risk is eliminated or abates, the need for this program goes away, at least for this rationale.
Okay, so I don't mean to argue the point, but you also said earlier that you could program the pagers to limit the number of people who are called out. So that would eliminate the convergent response, would it not?
Yes, in theory, we could have, it would require people coming to the fire hall and constantly exchanging pagers, because we can only program so many of them and they would have to exchange them, which is obviously not what we want to do. But yes, that is possible.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I may ask a question of clarification before going to Councillor Duncan, is in terms of pager calls going out, is it the case that you don't know how many it can respond?
Well, precisely. Typically, you know, we have a good idea, but it's a crapshoot. After 4:30, everyone's a volunteer. And you never know what you're going to get. I'm more than often, I'm very pleasantly surprised with the dedication and the turnout of our staff, but there are times where maybe a large number or group of our volunteers have had a drink, or they're in town, or something's going on, they're not able to respond. And like I've said, if I've been the duty officer, I've done a number of calls, medical calls by myself. So that's not completely out of the realm of possibility.
So we've heard of the circumstance now, and what we're doing is we're going basically to a paid on call, And to me, it would be much more efficient to have paid on call with staff at the CSB rather than having to make the additional trip to the CSB.
Yeah, and I would caution the terminology of paid on call. I wouldn't even go down that road. You know, these are volunteers that would be coming in on a flat rate kind of stipend.
Okay.
And that's probably the best way to look at it.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. And I want to emphasize the temporary nature of this. We're looking at 2 months, and we can certainly evaluate it at that time. But I'll turn to Councillor Duncan next.
Thank you. Just looking at the recommendation before us, it seems to me that what Council's discussion was mainly on that this is a request for something that required budget, and so we are giving approval or not for Safe Restart grant funding to be used for that budget amount, and whether or not whether Council sees merit in how the fire chief has chosen to meet the requirements of fire response and medical response in Sydney is, I don't know if that's normally what Council would be called on to comment on when being asked about a budget item for this, especially if it's a matter of paying the same amount out of the Safe Restart grant funding for whether these people are at home and paid on call or they're paid to be in the fire station. It seems like it'd be the same amount. So I'm a little worried about the questions and the detail with regard to whether or not the fire chief's recommendations on how to run the fire and emergency response are within our purview. And so I guess I would like clarification on whether there were other more financially efficient methods that the chief needed to evaluate before coming forward to us to request that we use Safe Restart grant funding, or whether we're assuming that the most economically efficient way to do this was already coming forward.
I would, through the chair to Councillor Duncan, I've spoke with my colleagues and have looked at a number of different options, and if there's another way we can get 3 NFPA 1001 firefighters in the building for just over $500 a night, I think you're, if you can find a way, let me know, but we're working on pennies on the dollar here, so I don't think the money's the issue.
Thank you, Chief. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I was ready to move the recommendation. If you're happy I do that, then I'll proceed.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Further discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. So, I'm not, getting into Councillor Duncan's comment about, I don't think we're in a position to tell the fire chief how to fight fires and all that sort of thing, but our responsibility is in terms of the financial side. And so I guess for me, I'm not feeling that, it seems to me that there's another option that could be considered that might not cost as much money, and I'm not feeling that that's been looked at. What I feel here is there's two separate issues that are being mixed in with this, and I think Councillor Fallett alluded to it. And so there's the issue that the chief described in terms of the challenge they have in getting people to come out on evenings and weekends or whatever. And so that is one issue, and that will continue to be an issue whether or not I think we bring people into the CSB or not. So whether they are actually physically located at the CSB or whether they're at home and they're one of the people who get the pager for that day to get called in, that will always be an issue, whether COVID or not. And I think, we need to have a different discussion about that. If we're concerned about reducing the risk of COVID to our firefighters and staff on these convergent responses, then it absolutely makes more sense for me that we not have people resident at the CSB. They should be staying away as much as possible, not coming into the CSB, it seems to me. And they have one of those pagers, and so if there is a call, it goes out to them, and then those few then come in, rather than be physically at the CSB with others. So I think we're getting those things mixed up. I think that there's another option that I'd like to see considered, and so I can't support it at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor O'Keefe. The motion carries. I thank you, Chief, for bringing that forward. We'll turn to item 13D, a grant application for Community Emergency Preparedness Fund report from the Deputy Chief, and I'll turn to the Chief for a brief introduction on that.
Thank you. Through the chair, just again, a brief report prepared by my deputy, just outlining a grant opportunity through the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund for Sydney to participate in evacuation route planning. As you're well aware, I mean, evacuation route planning is one of those many things that has been on our emergency management kind of hit list for a long time, but it's definitely in no way is it Sydney specific. And this grant provides us an excellent opportunity to have kind of a larger CRD kind of holistic approach in respect to how we would deal with evacuation and disaster route planning, and have it funded through UBCM. So it's an excellent opportunity for the town.
Thank you, Chief. Won't turn to questions. We do have a motion, a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that council support the town's application for the $22,050 Community Emergency Preparedness Fund evacuation route planning, and authorize the fire chief and deputy fire chief to execute any agreements related to a successful grant application.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you again, Chief. We'll go to the next item, 13E, the monthly building report, permit report.
Move receipt for information.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We have no correspondence or new business, so we'll turn to correspondence for information.
Move receipt for information. Move receipt, rather.
Second.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. We have a motion to go on camera.
I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider a confidential matter relating to employee and labor relation issues pursuant to section 90.1C of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. And a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.